Okay. Okay. I'm just going to put you on mute. As I said, you can unmute yourself if you have a question, but you can stay on mute so it doesn't bother anybody. Background noise. Okay, good evening, everybody. We are doing the last class of this class. It's called Days Are Coming. Beautiful class from JLI, as we took a beautiful journey the last 4 classes about, especially the last 2 classes about Eliyahu Hanavi. And now we come to the 5th class, which is a beautiful subject. I don't know if many of you know this subject, but maybe you have heard about it. And that is that it says that at the end of times, when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a big Suda. There's going to be a big meal. If you ever buy the Mashiach Suda in Chabad, you would know that Chuni sings a song at the end of the Suda. He sings it in Yiddish. Who's going to come to the Suda? He goes through all the great people are going to come to the Suda. Moshe Rabbeinu is going to say Torah, and Shlomo Melech is going to talk wisdom, and David HaMelech is going to sing songs, and Miriam is gonna do tambourine, etc. And what we're gonna eat at the Suda, and what we're gonna eat at this meal. It's a very interesting subject, this whole meal subject, and what's gonna be actually the meal, because by Jews it's important. We're not coming to a Suda if we don't know the what is on the menu. We need to know what's on the menu. And we're told what's going to be on this menu. It's a very interesting menu that's going to be at this Suda. There's an ethics of our Father. In chapter 3, he says as follows. In chapter 3, number 16, you don't have it yet. It's not in the book over here. He says, Rabbi Akiva said, "Who are your amen?" If you have a siddur. Everything is given on collateral. And the net is spread over all the living. The shop is open. And the shopkeeper extends credit. The ledger is open. And the hand is right. And any collector anyone who comes to borrow, let him come and borrow. And then he says, but the collectors make their rounds regularly. And they take payment from man with or without his knowledge. And they have on what they to rely. And then he ends off, Adin din emes, the judgment is a judgment of truth. Akol muchan l'suda, that's the ends off the end. And everything is prepared for the feast. So what does that mean also? Everything's prepared for what feast? Who's having a feast? And what is the feast exactly talking about in that Mishnah? Many commentators say that the Mishnah is talking about the feast of Gan Eden. That means everything person can do whatever he wants in this world. Everything is on collateral, and ultimately Judgment Day. And then after you pay your collateral, you are invited to the party, which is Gan Eden. But there are those who say that the Mishnah is really talking about the future times. That ultimately the world's going to come to its paying back its debt, so to say, in the purpose of creation and its journey. And ultimately, everything comes to the feast, the very famous feast that is going to happen. Book, you'll have to listen to what I say. It says the following: Yehuda said in the name of Shimon, the behemoths and the Levyasan will be the game for the righteous in the world to come. So over here, we have two expressions. The behemoths, which is the name for the Shoir Habor, which we call the Shoir Habor, the goring ox. The ox is there's an ox out there, and there's a fish that's called the Leviathan. The Leviathan. How are they slaughtered? So the behemoth, the Shoir, the ox, gores the Leviathan with its horns and shreds it. And the Leviathan impales the behemoth, the animal, with its fins and slaughters it. The sages ask a question. The sages says, is this kosher slaughtering? How are you slaughtering an animal? There's no such thing as slaughtering an animal with the goring ox. Well, there's not a problem with the fish. The problem is more the problem with the cow. How do you shecht an animal with fins of a fish? One may slaughter with any implement one may slaughter except with a scythe, a saw, teeth, or fingernails, since these strangle. So fins are more like a saw. So how does one slaughter this? How will this cow be kosher if it's slaughtered by a fin of a fish? So the Gemara answers. The Medrash says, Rav Avin said in the name of Bar Kana, God says, for a new teaching shall go forth from me. Novel parts of the Torah will go forth from me. Interesting Gemara, interesting Medrash. So there's going to be a Suda, and that the Suda, the two main parts of the meal, will be a meat from a big, humongous ox, and fish from a big fish that's called the Leviathan. That's the name of the fish. In text number 2, we find another Gemara. We find a Gemara. It says as follows. In the future, God will prepare a feast for the righteous on the day that he extends his mercy to the descendants of Isaac. After they eat and drink, the celebrants will give Abraham, our father, a cup of blessing to recite the blessing after the meal. Abraham will say to them, I will not recite the blessing, for the wicked Ishmael came from me. I'm not perfect. Abraham will say to Isaac, take the cup and recite the blessing. Isaac will say to them, I can't recite the blessing, as the wicked Esau came from me. Perfect. Isaac will turn to Jacob and he'll say, take the cup and recite the blessing. Jacob will say to them, I will not recite the blessing, as I married 2 sisters in their lifetime. I married Rachel and Leah. And the Torah would later forbid them from me. Therefore, I did something in essence that was not perfect, even though the Torah was not given yet. But he said ultimately the Torah was given and prohibited this kind of a union. So I'm not perfect. Jacob will turn to Moses and will say to Moses, take the cup and recite the blessing. Moses will say to them, I will not recite the blessing, as I did not merit to enter Israel. Seemingly I'm not perfect either. Neither in my life nor in my death, I'm not in the land of Israel. Moses will say to Joshua, take the cup and recite the blessing. Trying to find somebody to recite the blessing. Joshua will say to them, I will not recite the blessing, as I did not merit to have any sons. He had no children. Joshua will turn to David HaMelech, King David, and will say, take the cup, recite the blessing. David will say, I'll recite the blessing. You're right, I'm going to recite the blessing. And it's fitting to me to recite the blessing. As I say, I will lift up the cup of salvation, and I will call upon the name of God. So therefore, we found the person who's going to recite the blessing. So that means, in essence, they're going to be a Suda. What he wants to prove from this statement of the Gemara, you don't recite a blessing after a meal if there's not a meal. So that means there's going to be a meal, and the meal is going to be made, the main course of this meal is going to be these two, and wine also. There's going to be three things, mainly meat from a big shoyd habar, which is called, and the Levyasan, fish from the Levyasan. And that's what the Gemara says. What does that mean exactly? So therefore, we all know Maimonides, he was the realist, and Maimonides in text number 3 on page 68 says right away, the good beyond which there can be other good. This was the good desired by all the prophets. The sages refer to this good, which is prepared for the righteous, by a metaphor of feast. So the Rambam Maimonides right away says that this is only a metaphor. This is a metaphor. We're talking about a feast. We're talking about a spiritual feast. We're not talking about a real, actual feast with these two entities. These are all a metaphor for spiritual concepts, and therefore don't get stuck into this feast and who's going to eat and who's not going to eat and what you're going to eat. It's all metaphoric. But the Rambam right away, the Ravid, we know that there was a great sage, the Ravid, who right away argues on the Rambam and says, not true. There is going to be a feast. You can't take it away from it. It's simple. You got to say there's going to be a feast. And there's a whole argument between the Maimonides and Nachmanides. And Nachmanides actually, in this case, agrees with Maimonides. He says it doesn't mean the feast of Mashiach. He's talking about the feast in Gan Eden. Over there, it's a metaphorical. Kol Muchal Suda, everything's prepared for a feast. So in Gan Eden, for sure, in paradise, for sure, it's a feast. A metaphorical feast, but the Rambam holds it will be an ultimate feast by Mashiach, and therefore in text number 4 it says, know this Rabbi Eliezer Halevi, who is known as the Chiddushei Halachas, he wrote many books on halacha, on Jewish law. He says, know this, we ought to believe all matters in their simple literal sense. Though many commentators interpret in various ways, they do not supplement the plain meaning. That means, as we know the very famous statement in the Gemara, Ein mikra yotzim pshutei. You cannot take the verse out of its simplicity. So if the verse says we're going to have a party, and the party is going to be made of a fish, gefilte fish, is Leviathan fish, not gefilte fish, Leviathan fish, and we're going to have a shoyd habar, we're going to have a big ox food, we're going to have big steaks, and we're going to have unbelievable wine. That's, you got to take it as it says, and that's what's going to be. So we have to first find out, where does this come from? Where does this stem from? This Levyasan. Let's talk about the Levyasan. Where does this stem from, this whole concept of this Levyasan? So the truth is that it stems from many places in the Torah. And you can write down these places. You can look at them up later. So if you go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, we're holding the 5th day of creation. It says, verse 21. It says God created big fish. And Rashi, who translates it to a 5-year-old child, says on the Rashi, on this verse, first he says, Dogim gedolim shvayam, big fish in the sea, very big fish. Ubedivri Agada, Rashi brings down an Agada. He says, Hu Levyasan, it's the Levyasan fish. And what happened? Uben Zugay, The Eibishter created, in the fifth day of creation, he created these two humongous fish. Humongous. I'm not going to go into all the Gemaras that talk about how big these fish are. They're so big that God, it says, that they were going to destroy the world. They were too big because when they moved, they rocked the ocean in a very, very strong way. So God, Rashi, I'm reading the Rashi, Haragas and Akeva, he killed the female fish of the Leviathan. Umalach latzadikim, and he salted it. He took this fish, he salted it, and he put it away for the righteous people. Why? Because if he let them live, they would have destroyed the world. So, and there's another expression that says that the Gemara, the Talmud, another place says that every day God goes and he plays with the second Leviathan. He feels bad for the second fish that has been lonely for the last 5,000 years. He's been lonely someplace in some ocean somewhere, this humongous fish, and he goes and he's misachik, he, so to say, plays with this Leviathan, keeps him company, whatever that means. So that's an open Rashi, an open Chumash, an open verse in the Torah that Rashi translates to a 5-year-old child, that it means that this big fish, this Leviathan fish, this humongous fish. And that's where you have it in your text number 5 on page 69. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, everything the Holy One, blessed be, created in the world, he created male and female, even the Leviathan, the rod serpent and the Leviathan, the Taurus serpent. He created male and female. Had they coupled and produced offspring, they would have destroyed the entire world. What did Hashem blessed do? He castrated the male, he killed the female, and salted the female to preserve in the banquet for the righteous in the future. As it stated, and he will slay the serpent that is in the sea. So here, the Talmud, the Gemara says exactly what he did with the Leviathan, the female Leviathan. He killed it, and he put the meat away for the future. Salted it, it's preserved someplace. The Gemara even says further there, that what do you do with the skin of the Leviathan? Because God does not waste anything. What do you do with the skin of this fish? And it says, it's brought down, that with the skin of the Leviathan, that was the clothes that God made for Adam and Eve after they sinned. He used the skin of the Leviathan for their garments. Lord and Taylor, he was the first Lord and Taylor. He made for them garments. He made it out of the skin of the Leviathan. So everything was used. And those that say, we always say on Sukkot, that will come a day that God will build this humongous sukkah that will will be able to hold all the Jews. The Gemara says, what's going to be the walls of the sukkah is going to be the skin of the Leviathan. But the truth is, my friends, you find it in other places. You can look this up later. In Tehillim, chapter 84, chapter 74, verse 14, openly in Tehillim, Psalms, in chapter 74, verse 14, it says as follows: you have crushed the head of the Leviathan, leaving him as food for the nations wandering in the wilderness. So there we have the expression of the Leviathan. If you go to chapter 104, you go to chapter 104, verse number 26, it says again, Shamaniyas Aleichem, their ships travel, Leviathan, there is a Leviathan in the ocean that you created to frolic, to play with. Here's what I told you. It says that the Eibishter plays, God says he plays with the Levyasan every single day. In Eiv, look up over there in Eiv, chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. Over there he also mentions the Levyasan, this fish. And so too in Eiv, chapter number 40, chapter 40 also mentions the Levyasan. So we have the Levyasan. And in Eiv chapter 40, over there he mentions the Shor HaBird. Over there he mentions the gigantic ox that God created. He mentions over there, you can look it up, he mentions that there's a humongous ox that roams the mountains of Israel. I don't know why they haven't found it yet, but it must be like very fast. It roams the mountains of Israel. It eats extremely a lot of food, drinks unbelievable amount of water. And that's the ox that's going to be slaughtered when Mashiach comes. And it's going to be given for the for the Suda, for this unbelievable party that we're all going to be invited to. And again, there's a lot of Gemaras that talk about even how much each one of these things drink. And what water they drink the water from the Jordan. It goes through all of these things. These, in essence, from all these expressions of the Gemara and Talmud, all of them say that these two things, the Shor HaBird, the behemoth, the big animal, is a very extremely choicey animal. And this fish, this Leviathan, is extremely an unbelievable fish. And then in text number 6, it talks about the wine. The Talmud talks about the wine. It says, what is the reward about which it states, no eye has ever seen? Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, that is the wine that has been preserved in its grapes since the 6th day of creation, which no eye has ever seen. We're going to have wine, be served wine at this Suda, at this party, wine that nobody has ever tasted such unbelievable, special wine. When I learned this and I looked up more commentators, I realized that I better start learning how to drink dry wine, because I believe it's probably a very dry wine and a very expensive wine. I don't think it's a sweet wine. So this is the unbelievable wine that we're going to drink when Mashiach comes. Okay, so we all have this party, and we're all going to have unbelievable food at this party. And as we said, so that's what's going to happen. If you take it literally, and we should take it literally, as mentioned, or you take it metaphorically, you have to take it both ways. You need to take it literally and metaphorically. But let's go a little bit deeper into this concept, into this aspect, and Chassidus, the way Chassidus expresses itself in the concept of this party, of this Suda, of this humongous, unbelievable meal that's going to be given. We have a beautiful text over here from the Maharal Prague. It's interesting that they brought Maharal Prague because yesterday was the 18th day of Elul, the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, the birthday of the Alter Rebbe, and it's also the yahrzeit, the passing day of the Maharal Prague. The Alter Rebbe is a descendant of the Maharal Prague. So it's also a very special day for him, the 18th day yesterday, the 18th day of Elul. So look what he says in text number 7. It says something very interesting. He says, this world is not meant to be unified. Perfect world. This world is not meant to be a unified, perfect world until Mashiach comes. Then there'll be no war. Rather, it will be a unified world without any division or fragmentation. This then is the idea of the future banquet. Banquet means reward. For enduring the tremendous suffering of exile, receiving this reward is called a banquet. So the Maharal MiPrague says, yeah, you're going to have a banquet, but really means a reward. It means the Eibusher is going to give us a reward. That's what the meaning of the banquet is. The banquet is not a physical thing, rather a time to receive a reward, which is called a banquet. In the line with this, the participation in this banquet offers a cup to Abraham to recite grace. For every meal is followed with a blessing. For a person ought to thank God, the source of all blessings. There are no other tzaddikim righteous like David. So therefore the Medrash says, if you want to go to perfection, you got to go to David HaMelech. David HaMelech also had struggles in life. Also did things, as we know, that were not perfect. But David HaMelech transformed his life. And that's why he was about tshuva. And therefore, he is the one who shows the world how to become perfect. How, even with one's struggles in life, there's a capability of perfection to becoming perfect in life. So that's why the metaphor, that's why the story, we mentioned the Gemara before, says that they each turn to a different one to say a blessing. What means a blessing? To express the beauty of this reward. Avraham Avinu says, I'm imperfect because Yishmael comes from me. And it was there after my death. Yitzchak said, Esav was there after my death. Yaakov says, I was still, in essence, married after my death. So too Moshe Rabbeinu says, as he says openly, before my death and after my death, I still was not buried in Israel. Yeshua says, I had no children in my lifetime and after my lifetime. And David HaMelech says, I struggled in my lifetime, but I brought perfection. And that's why we always say the return of the kingdom of David. Because David also struggled in life, had many ups and downs, as we know. But ultimately, he perfected everything in his life. And that's why David HaMelech does the blessing at the party. That's why David HaMelech does the blessing of this reward, in essence. So let's continue reading. There was so great, and only it was only inevitable that the greatness would entail such sort of deficiency. David had no deficiencies, and thus is the best suited to recite grace. King David was similar to the future King Mashiach, which is why Mashiach will descend from him. David and Mashiach share the same theme of bringing the world to perfection, which is the principal quality of future times. So therefore, that's the way the Maharal MiPrague explains the banquet. But we don't see the Maharal MiPrague talk about the two fish. It doesn't mention about the Leviathan. It doesn't mention about the cow. What do we do with this? What do we do with that part of it? How does that have to do? What is his whole interpretation of the concept, the spiritual concept of going out of Gullus to perfection of the world, to do with this big Leviathan and this cow, this Shoyra bird, this big, humongous cow? So therefore, we have a statement of the Kedushas Levi, statement number 8. And he says as follows, text number 8 of Levi Tzibaditchim said as follows. He said the future banquet for the righteous will be experienced on two levels. One on a simple meal, and another will be a spiritual opportunity to uncover the secrets of the Torah. And they are both true. For more ordinary folk, whose concept of pleasure is limited to material, it will be the physical meal. For the righteous, whose conception of pleasure are secrets of the Torah, the meal will be an opportunity to uncover great wonders of the Torah. So that comes the Berditchever, and he says, in essence, I'm going to go both ways because we have a meal. I'm going to go both ways. It is a concept of a spiritual relationship, what's going to happen at the perfection of the physical, and therefore you'll be able to have a greater spiritual relationship with God at this party. But what about all the Jews that don't have the capability of a spiritual relationship? You think everybody's going to become spiritual and godly in one moment? It's going to take time. They still have the feeling of a physical delight. And therefore they will also have a reward. And they will have good steaks and wonderful meat of the Leviathan. That's the way the Berditchever learns it. Comes the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe is a very powerful statement in text number 9. Comes the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe says, I'm going to try to explain you the Shoir HaLeviathan, the Shoir HaBer, this ox, and this fish. These two entities are really symbolic, actually, to two kinds of tzaddikim. There are two kinds of righteous people in the world. You have the righteous that deal with the world, and you have the righteous that separate themselves from the world, hide themselves from the world. So to say the example, let's say Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai struggled with the world, with the Roman world at his time, and then he ran away and hid in the cave for 12 years. Separate himself from the world. Totally separate himself from the world. And therefore, there are those that say that he didn't do anything besides learn Torah. He separated himself from the physical world. It was irrelevant to him, the whole physical world. He lived, as you know the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he lived in the ground the entire day. From his head to his body, he was in the ground. He was buried in the ground. And he lived off boxer and water. He had a spiritual life, a godly existence. And if we know the story of Shimon Bar Yochai, I'll give you an analogy of Shimon Bar Yochai. And when he came out of the cave after 12 years and he saw a Jew plowing and harvesting, he said, that's what Jews are doing. We have an unbelievable Torah, and Jews are plowing, working in the fields. He burnt the field. He burnt the field. And a voice came out from heaven and said, go back to the cave. Go back into the cave, because you're going to have to learn how to deal with the world, that the world is still in existence. And we need the world. I wanted the world. I created the world. And after another year in the cave, he came out and he changed his ways, started to give blessings, started to rectify things in the world. So the Alter Rebbe says that we find these two kinds of journeys in life. The Alter Rebbe talks about tzaddik, but this can be for anybody. There are two ways we can deal with the world. We can separate ourselves from the world. The world is a tough situation. The world is a challenge. The world is a difficult situation. So I'll separate myself from the world. I'll go live on a mountain. I'll deny the world. Correct. He was running from the Romans. He was running from the Romans. Correct. Don't argue. I'm not an argument. He was running from the Romans. I said he started off as a run from the Romans, and ultimately hid in a cave for 12 years. and became extra spiritual, totally godly. As you see, that he lived in a very godly fashion and very incapable as a human being to be able to survive that the way he survived. And again, those who say that he didn't do any mitzvahs, he only sat and learned Torah. In the Gemara it says that Shimon didn't do anything but Torah Mnasseh. He didn't do anything. Not he prayed, not he did any mitzvah. He sat and he learned Torah. And that's what he did. He was a godly individual. I understand it wasn't his choice. I'm not arguing with you, but ultimately that's what forced upon him this situation. And ultimately that's what he became. And as I said, the story is told that he went out and he started burning. He said, how is it possible that we're going back to the world? We should have a spiritual existence. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, those who deal with, say the world is a hard thing to deal with. We need to go away from the world. We need to walk away, have a spiritual existence, deny the concept of the world. And there are those righteous, regular Jews who deal with the world, who struggle with the world. And that's the two entities of the Shoiraber, the goring ox, and the Levyasan, which is a fish which is hidden in the ocean. So the Alter Rebbe says these two entities are the goring ox, the one who fights in the world, the one who's like a goring ox, as Yaakov Avinu called Yosef. Yaakov Avinu called Yosef, you are like an ox, and you have the horns of an ox. Kind of ain't kind of. You have like the horns of an ox. Why? Because Joseph was the opposite of his brothers. His brothers were shepherds, while he was a king in Mitzrayim. That's why it says when his brothers came down, they didn't recognize him. And the Rebbe explains, because his brothers shepherds. Why was his brothers shepherds? Because they didn't want to be part of the world. And that the best way in that time was to be a shepherd, sit with your flock, and sit and meditate and contemplate and be a spiritual reality. Yosef was a shalut b'Mitzrayim. He was a person who was involved in the finances, in the building, in the food. He was involved in every aspect of time. As you learn the Torah, he was involved in every aspect of Mitzrayim. He was more involved in Mitzrayim than the Pharaoh. That when the Egyptians came to the Pharaoh and they said Yosef is telling him to do this and telling him to do that, he's like going above his authority. And what did the Pharaoh say? Whatever he says, do. He is Shalom b'Mitzrayim. He is the ruler over Mitzrayim. Yosef is the Shoir Haber. Joseph is the goring ox. The Shvatim are the Levyasan. They are the ones who separated themselves from the world. And that's why they didn't recognize him. It's a beautiful statement of the Alter Rebbe. Let's read it. There are two types of tzaddikim, the Alter Rebbe writes. In text number 9, there are two types of tzaddikim. The hidden ones, whose religious service is spiritual in nature, namely with the intent of spiritual unification. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who hid in a cave for 13 years, was one of such tzaddikim. While there, he certainly couldn't fulfill any mitzvahs. After all, he lived on a carrot tree, and a stream created especially for him. He couldn't eat matzah Passover, make kiddush on wine, or shake the lulav nesek on sukkahs. So for 13 years, the man didn't do a mitzvah. Didn't make kiddush on Friday night. Didn't eat matzah on Pesach. Didn't hear shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah. Didn't do a mitzvah. He separated himself from the world. It's called in the Gemara Teirasai Umnasai. His living was Torah. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was Teirasai Umnasai, which is an unbelievable level. says that when Rabbi Shimon Yochai, when a Jew came later, when a Jew came to Rabbi Shimon Yochai, when Jews came to Rabbi Shimon Yochai, like needed rain, let's say, Rabbi Shimon Yochai would say a pasuk and it would rain. He would say a verse in the Torah and it would rain. He did it, Chassidus explains, he did it with the koyach of Torah. Rabbi Akiva, for the opposite, he davened. When it came to him, the famous Avinu Malkeinu, we say in Rosh Hashanah, in Kippur, in this Aseres Metshuva, the Avinu Malkeinu is one of the authors, is Rabbi Akiva. He prayed. He had to pray. Rabbi Shimon Yochai, anything that a Jew came to him and asked him that he needed a miracle, he said a verse in the Torah, and so it happened. That was the power of Rabbi Shimon Yochai. And the Gemara, not the subject here, the Gemara talked that he was not obligated really to do any mitzvahs because he was on a higher level. He was spiritually so high that he was separated in essence from all aspects of mitzvahs, if you can imagine such a situation. But for sure, he didn't do any mitzvahs the 13 years that he would live in this cave. Second type of tzaddik, because let me tell you something, if he wasn't in that situation, he wouldn't be able to get away with, even though he was forced to run, he would have to figure out a way to eat matzah and to do all these things. So he would have to figure out some kind of a way. I mean, if he couldn't, then he wouldn't have to do it. But he would have, if he could, he would have to figure a way to eat matzah and to blow shofar and to do every other mitzvah in the Torah. He didn't try to find another way. Simply separated from the world for 12 years, 13 years. Separate himself from the world. We find that by many tzaddikim. In general, you find throughout history, tzaddikim never wanted to have the role of being a known tzaddik. The Baal Shem Tov, for the first 30 years of his life, nobody knew who he was. They thought he was a simple Jew. They thought he was a simple, ignorant Jew. Nobody knew him. They thought he was a teacher, a little preschool teacher who took children to school every day and sang with them alabays. Nobody knew who he was. The Baal Shem Tov would have never come out to the open if he wasn't commanded to come out. He was commanded. He was told from heaven, you have to reveal yourself. He was born in 1698, as we mentioned in the class yesterday. He was born in 1698. He revealed himself in 1734. He's 36 years old. So the first 36 years, nobody knew who he was. And we have many, that's why Dalizah writes, it's tzaddikim nestorim. There are righteous people that we don't even know they're righteous. It might be your next door neighbor. It might be somebody you think is an ignorant person. There's a beautiful story that told of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe once told the Chassid. The Chassid told him that he's leaving, he's going to Paris. It's a famous story. He's going to Paris. The Alter Rebbe said, you're going to Paris? Very nice. Are you going to go to the opera? The Chassid said, he looked at him, going to the opera? Why would I go to the opera? I'm not interested in going to the Alter Rebbe said, go to the opera. And you're going to meet here, you're going to meet there somebody. You're going to look there for somebody, a guy, Yanko, I've got the name, and give him, he gave him a Tanya. Give it to him. Ask him what he thinks about it. The guy went to the opera. This chassid. He fell asleep. He didn't know the opera. He didn't know it was like in a place that he didn't know what was going on. He fell asleep. And the next thing he knew, he was woken up by the cleaner. This guy is cleaning the opera, wakes him up. Guy drinks. He says, "Oh, Vey, I'm supposed to meet somebody." He says, "Who?" He says, "Whatever. Looking for Yankel." This. He says, I'm him. The guy's like shocked. The cleaner of the opera is the Alter Rebbe is sending. He hands it to him. He says, the Alter Rebbe. Guy right away takes the book, starts reading it. He says, tell the Alter Rebbe, I agree with it. He was a tzaddik nister. He was a hidden tzaddik, a hidden person. Nobody knew that, and maybe nobody ever knew it. So the Arizal writes there's 36 tzaddikim nistarim or 72 tzaddikim nistarim. How many? There could be hundreds of tzaddikim nistarim, hidden tzaddikim that nobody knows. They're hidden away from the world. The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that one of the most hardest things for a tzaddik is to come out to the world. Because a tzaddik wants to have his relationship with God. And then when he comes out to the world, he has to get involved with humanity. It's a big struggle for a tzaddik to get involved with humanity. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu, for the first 7 years, he was a shepherd. Then he became a leader of the Jewish nation. He said, get me out of the job. He claimed to God, get me out. To deal with people is not an easy thing to do. And especially a righteous individual, a great tzaddik, that wants to have a spiritual relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, self-assert to this tzaddik to deal with human beings and have struggles with them, that's like an ox. That's a big job. That's a big avoid. So you can understand Moshe Rabbeinu, who saw the beginning of the world to the end of the world, saw the greatness of going to Eretz Yisrael, and was dealing with people who didn't see that. You can understand his struggle as Moshe Rabbeinu to deal with Am Yisrael, which was an unbelievable struggle. So too every tzaddik struggled as a righteous man, as a leader, ultimately revealed tzaddik, as a leader, to be able to straighten out people, to be able to change the world when he's dealing with people and with people that don't see what he's talking about. That's why the prophets struggled. Yidden called the prophets Meshuggah because they came and told the Jews, this is what's going to happen. They said, you're Meshuggah now. You're crazy. Go to a psychiatrist. So can you imagine the struggles of the prophets? Because it's not easy. But ultimately, we need a tzaddik. We need a tzaddik that comes out. The second type of tzaddik, going back to the second type, is one that is in plain view. They engage with the material matter, performing physical mitzvahs, which also draws down intense godly energy. They want to change the world. Both are connecting to God. One is changing the world. One is struggling with the world. One is overcoming the constraints and the struggles of other people. Now, the former tzaddik, called the creature of the sea, climbs to dizzying heights, like fish that swiftly swim from one end of the sea to the other. These tzaddikim swiftly climb to greater heights than those who work with the material, bogged down as they are with the lowly matters. So why would anybody want to be the Shoyer HaBer? Why would anybody want to be the goring ox? Which tzaddik wants to be the tzaddik like the goring ox? So the Alter Rebbe says, continues. Look at his analogy. In future times, the Leviathan will battle the Shoyer HaBer. This is going to be the battle. The battle is what is important. Is it important only the spiritual, or is it important that the physical comes spiritual? And the Leviathan is going to kill the Shoyer HaBer. The battle of the Shoyer HaBer, and he'll slaughter it with his fins. The second type tzaddik is represented by the Shoyer HaBer, whose engagement with material matters is obviously not simply to fulfill their bellies with meat and revel in it, God forbid, rather to sublimate it, namely to fuel a passionate rejoicing with God. That's why he works with the physical, because he's trying to find the godliness in the physical. That's the avodah of a tzaddik. He's not interested in the physical because of the physical. He's interested in the physical because he wants to transform the physical. In so much that their path is inferior to a spiritual tzaddik, The Leviathan will thus slaughter the Shoyt HaBer. Namely, she will elevate it. That's what means slaughter. Slaughter doesn't mean that the Chas Shalom is going to slaughter. It's going to elevate that tzaddik. The tzaddik will be elevated by the hidden tzaddik. But listen how the Alter Rebbe ends. The reality is that the Shoyt HaBer will also elevate the Leviathan. Even though you might think that the Leviathan tzaddik, the tzaddik who doesn't connect himself to the physical, needs to elevate the tzaddik who struggles with the physical, but ultimately it's going to go the other way too. The tzaddik that works with the world is ultimately going to elevate the tzaddik who doesn't. Because ultimately the tzaddik that works to the world, transforms the world, is a tzaddik that's going to bring a greater light than the tzaddik that doesn't transform the world. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says. The reality is that Shoyt HaBer will elevate by the Leviathan for, in a certain way, the Shoyt HaBer tzaddik performs a greater service. So the path, though his path is mired in material matters, fact is that this is what the Torah prescribes. You shall rejoice in your festival. Joy is only with meat and wine. From this perspective, the Shoyt HaBer will elevate the Leviathan. So my friends, that's why David HaMelech makes the bracha, makes the grace after meal on this party. We need to elevate the world. Most of us think that there are two entities. There's the spiritual and the physical. And I'm going to have a spiritual life. And that spiritual life will go higher and higher and higher. I'll have my spiritual reality. My physical life? Oh, I don't know what's going to be with that. I cannot deal with it. I don't know if I can change it. It's just too powerful. And why should I mix my physical life with my spiritual reality? Comes the Rebbe and says that you're going to see by changing your physical reality, you're going to have a greater spiritual reality. Because your spiritual reality will be connected with the elevation of the physical. And as it's taught in Chassidus, that where do you find the essence of God is not in the spiritual. Where do you find the essence of God is by the bringing out the godliness in that physical mitzvah, in that physical reality. So that's why, in essence, the Alter Rebbe says, that's the party. What is the party? The party is, when Mashiach comes, we are going to party because we have changed the world. We, through our day-to-day service, now in the world today, through us doing everyday mitzvahs, and sometimes we struggle with these mitzvahs, like with a Shoyt HaBer, it's like an ox. Sometimes we struggle. It's not so easy to do this mitzvah. It's time, and it's money, and it's frustration, and other people are challenging you, and your mind is challenging you, your heart is challenging you. There's so many challenges that you say, why do I need to struggle with this? I can sit and not fight with the physical and just be spiritual. I'll have my spiritual time and not struggle with the physical. Then we're not going to bring Mashiach because we're not going to elevate this world. The tzaddik, the righteous man that changes the world, ultimately brings Mashiach to the world. We, each and every one of us, are that tzaddik. Each and every one of us that continue to do good today, continue to overcome our struggles today, continue to do the mitzvah today, we will merit to the revelation, not only for ourselves, my friends, not only for ourselves, but for David HaMelech, for Moshe Rabbeinu, for Eliyahu Hanavi, all these great tzaddikim, these great illuminaries, the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe. We are going to bring an end of this darkness by changing the world today. And that's going to bring Geula, that's going to bring redemption to the world. And it'll ultimately give a spiritual reality to ourselves and to all these tzaddikim who are relying on us. And therefore, there was a very famous statement before the Rebbe had a stroke. He said, I've done everything I can do, and now I'm relying on you. I have done everything I can do as a righteous person. I've given you all the tools. I've given you all the intellect. I've given you all the words. I've given you everything that you need. And the Rebbe did give the world every angle, every way, anything you have an issue with, the Rebbe answered and figured out a way to do it. He prepared everything, like a table, like a set table. We just have to do it. And that's what the Rebbe said. I have done everything. I've prepared everything. Now it's up to each and every one of us to take that situation and change the reality. You know, we gave out a couple of months ago the book Positively Biased. We gave it out to close to 60 people in Boca. And it's unbelievable the feedback that I'm getting from this book. And I myself, that I've read this book already twice, if you read that book and you do not start changing your bias, you don't change it to a positive, then you're not reading it. You need to read it again. The Rebbe gave in that book, which is, the Rebbe didn't write that book. Rabbi Mendel Kaplan wrote this book, and he just took it from the Rebbe's teachings and the Rebbe's letters. So if you just read that book and you say, wow, how the Rebbe took every angle, any angle that I want to look negative, he answered every angle. He didn't leave any angle unanswered. He didn't leave any question for doubt, set up for doubt. You can go any way you want. You'll read that book. You'll see that any question you have, any angle, any complaint you have, any issue you have, the Rebbe said, no, I can find a positive way to look at it. I can show you how to look at it positive. If you look at it this way, if you think this way, if your attitude is that way, you'll see it differently. Covered every angle. That's all we need to do is read the book. And then we need to just put it into action. We need to put it into action. And then we'll transform the world. Transform the world. Because if the 60 people that read this book, that I gave the book, we gave the book, Chabad gave the book to, would start having a positive attitude and start responding in a positive way, that's going to change. 60 people will change the world. And it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. That's the Shoira bird. That is the goring ox. That's the ox. You want to be a tzaddik that's hidden. You want to be a righteous man that's hidden. No, we need to be the righteous man that's open, that's revealed, that shows the struggles that he's going with and overcomes it. And these great tzaddikim already gave us all the ways to overcome our struggles and our doubts and our humps in the road, whatever you want to call it, bumps and humps in the road. So it's a beautiful ending to this wonderful class of days are coming. And I believe that the days are coming. The days are coming is up to us to make these days coming. It's up to each and every one of us to make the end of days coming. As we started off this class, we all know that there's a time where God decides exactly when Mashiach is coming. Acheshena, we need to rush it a little faster. And the Rebbe said the way we rush a little faster, based on Maimonides, it's not only the Rebbe, said, do a mitzvah. Every one of us should do another mitzvah, an extra mitzvah a day, an extra penny to charity. If you give every day 1 penny, give an extra penny. I want to mention to everybody, I'm going to show you something. I've spoken about this last year. It's called Keren Hashana. Be a giver every day. This is what the Rebbe established. You see on the bottom, it says www.kerenhashana.com. www.kerenhashana.com. This, the Rebbe said, if everybody would sign up to this basically, you give, let's say, a penny a day towards to this. You go to kerenhashana.com and you give tzedakah. Let's say you give 5 cents a day, which is $17.65. On the back of the card, I have that list. So if you give 5 cents a day, it's $17.65. So for example, I give 18 cents a day, which comes out to $63.54. $63.54. Every day, there's an organization that gives tzedakah for me. I mean, there doesn't pass a day that I didn't give tzedakah besides Shabbos and Yom Tov. The Rebbe established this. That means besides the penny you're going to put in your pushka, you're going to be covered. That every day tzedakah is going to be given in your name every single day. This is something that Rebbe established many, many years ago. He called it Keren Hashana. The Keren means the fund, the daily giving fund. Because the Rebbe wanted that every day we should do the mitzvah of tzedakah, whether we know it or not, whether we physically gave it, or let's say we forgot to give it, somebody gave it. It's not a lot of money. Even if you give 5 cents a day, it's $17.65. I mean, you can give more. But I give 18 cents. And there's $63. I've done this for over 20, 30 years, every year. I think everyone should do this if you can. And do Keren Hashana. Give tzedakah every single day. It's one thing that the Rebbe asked we should do, so we're doing something that also the Lubavitch Rebbe asked we should do. I want to thank you all for coming and learning together with me. Tomorrow night at 8 p.m., we're having Rabbi Yossi Jacobson, phenomenal speaker. You don't want to miss that. Rabbi Yossi Jacobson, he's going to be on this Zoom number. I want to also mention that we're going to be having the give out next week on Wednesday. We're going to be having also a Wednesday night class on Rosh Hashanah at this Zoom at 7:30. And we just put out that we're going to be having on next Thursday, for Rosh Hashanah, we're going to be having a L'chaim get-together, myself and my brother Alti Hookit from Lexington. We're going to schmooze together about Rosh Hashanah, the old days and the present days. And it's going to be a wonderful time together, two brothers that are going to get together on this. Actually, it's going to be on the Zoom of Lexington, and the Zoom number is there on the brochure. I wish you all a wonderful evening, a wonderful night. If you have any questions, I can open it up as I leave Facebook, and anybody has a